Hello, everyone. Kimsey here. I'm so glad to be here, as always, the Monday after Thanksgiving. So I hope everyone's getting back from a nice long weekend. Seemed like a lot of people took the whole week off, which, like, I'm jealous. My heart goes out to the parents with kids in school that had the week off and you didn't. And you got to figure out what to do for that 3 days, before. So, anyways, hope everybody had a wonderful Thanksgiving. And like I said, I'm really glad to be here. Oh my gosh, is this seriously happening again? Oh my gosh, these tech issues keep happening. And it's driving me nuts. Okay, hang on 1 second. Let me figure this out. Hang on. I think I can do this real quick. That's okay. We'll do it later. Okay. So, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Kimsey Berkwin. I'm an integrative nutritionist in my online nutrition and wellness practice called Progressive Health and Wellness, where I work with ambitious men and women who are struggling with their mental and physical health by taking a root caused body mind approach to optimize their overall health. So, one thing I see a lot, and it especially often goes unrecognized, largely because of just variations in lab ranges, but that is low iron or iron deficiency. So, I'm going to list off some symptoms and see if any of these resonate. And as I do this, it looks like we've got some people hopping on. So, I would love to welcome everyone. Hello. Thank you for being here. And if you're watching the replay, drop a comment if you're watching the replay. Introduce yourself if you're here live or if you're watching the replay. I love to connect with my audience. And also, special shout out to my YouTube viewers. I have been streaming to YouTube because I use StreamYard and I get to pick another platform. So I was like, well, might as well. And I've been getting amazing feedback and amazing responses on YouTube. So thank you. It makes me really glad to be there. And I'm so passionate about what I do and spreading the awareness and accessibility to integrative health. And so I'm glad to know that other people are watching this too, or catching my content. So thank you for being there. Okay, so I'm going to talk about iron deficiency. So let me list off some symptoms. Some are obvious, some might not be. Tiredness, fatigue. That can be just like overall fatigue. You just feel tired all the time. Or it could be more specifically like muscular fatigue, almost like a myalgia, or you're walking upstairs, for example, and like your legs are burning more than they should, and you're more winded than you should be. Just seems like you have less endurance. So like a physical fatigue. Can also be a mental fatigue, difficulty with focus, concentration, maybe some brain fog, windedness, shortness of breath, in other words. So this can show up as like, you're catching your breath almost like you felt like you just exercised, but you just like walked around the block or you just did something simple. Or it can also be the sensation where it's hard to get a deep breath. It's like, you find yourself doing that a lot because it's hard to get like a full, satisfying breath. Dizziness just kind of randomly all the time, or especially dizziness when you go from seated or lying to standing. Restless legs. Restless legs, as the name implies, is the sensation like you need to move your legs. It's not involuntary, like a spasm per se. You can control it, but basically the sensation to move your legs gets so overwhelming that you eventually just kind of have to like jerk or kick your legs. Tends to be worse at night. Paleness. So pale lips, pale coloring, all around, pale nail beds, a whooshing sound in your ear, almost kind of like you can hear the blood flowing, or kind of similar to that feeling like when you get water stuck in your ear. There can be more anxiety, more depression, heart palpitations, headaches, unexplained weakness, or a pounding heart sensation. Almost like I had a client describe it one time, like it felt like her heart was working really hard. Like you could really feel each beat happening. So, how many of those symptoms resonate with you? Do you hear any of those and think, oh, yeah, I know I have low iron. I know those are symptoms. Or did you hear any of those and think, oh my gosh, is that I've had that for a long time? Maybe, I didn't know that that could be what it is. So, low iron is actually very common to see. And I'm going to differentiate um, low iron or iron deficiency and anemia. When I start talking about the three different stages of iron deficiency, that's where it'll become clear what those two differences are. Because it is possible to have suboptimal iron levels or even low iron levels, like overtly low iron, and not be anemic. Then it's also worth saying there's many different forms of anemia. So not all anemia is driven by iron deficiency. So next, actually, that makes sense. Let's go there. Let's talk about the three phases of iron deficiency. So first of all, I want to talk about lab reference ranges because this makes a big difference. So lab reference ranges on any, if you have your labs run by your doctor, put in a lab order, go to whatever lab, get it drawn. On the results, you'll always see a reference range. And it'll always say either range or reference range. It will never say normal. It'll definitely never say optimal. And that range is doctors are not working from a national standard when it comes to the lab reference range. That range actually changes per lab. It's based on that lab's results of the over a given year, 2,000 people seen, and they place those results on a bell-shaped curve to generate a low end and a high end, get a standard deviation, and that's what becomes the reference range. So we can appreciate, hopefully, this aha moment's going off where it's like, well, that's a skewed population, right? If these people that are having their blood drawn, sure, some might be healthy, absolutely, but a lot of them are not going to be. And so, how much do those unhealthy individuals affect the range? So, the range is screening for disease. In order for a doctor to make a diagnosis, though the results have to be outside of the lab reference range. It is not screening for optimization or optimal. It is not screening for prevention. So rather, when we look at medical research and look at what the optimal ranges are for something like serum iron or ferritin, which is the storage form of iron, or transferrin, which is a binding protein that helps you absorb iron, transport iron. If we look at what the medical research shows as the optimal levels or ranges for those values, there's a discrepancy in what we see to the lab reference range. The lab reference range is much broader because, again, it's screening for disease and it's based on an average. The medical research optimal ranges will typically be tighter and will fall, give or take, roughly within the middle or so of the lab reference range. So ferritin is a great example to start here. The range for ferritin, which is the storage form of iron on a typical lab, and again, that range will change per lab. So that's the other problem is a lab value might be flagged low or high when drawn from LabCorp, and it might be normal when drawn from Quest. So that is also an inconsistency in how some people might fall through the cracks when they really have some kind of problem, but they just happen to go to the wrong lab and fall into, this lab reference range. So going back to ferritin as a good example is the lab reference range, typically, at least on the labs that I use, and I have labs drawn through LabCorp for my clients, it's 15 to 150. So quite a big range, right? Well, we know the optimal range for ferritin is really like 75 to 115. So if somebody's at 45 for ferritin, they will fall within that optimal the lab range, but they might have symptoms and signs of iron deficiency. And then conversely, high ferritin is a problem too. High ferritin can be a sign of iron overload, hemochromatosis, excuse me, or inflammation. It's acute reactant inflammatory marker. So if somebody's ferritin is at, 145, that's still going to fall within that lab reference range, but it may be part of a larger pattern associated with some of those abnormalities. So I want to bring that up front, because as I start going through some of these, the phases of deficiency, I'm probably going to talk about some numbers, and the numbers that I talk about are the optimal ranges. So when we look at lab value, when we look at lab results, I always use the optimal ranges. I don't use the lab reference ranges for most values. It depends. Sometimes we use the lab reference range, but for most values, because in my world, I'm a nutritionist. I'm not a doctor. Legally, I cannot diagnose. So I'm not looking at it through that lens. I'm looking for optimization and prevention. So the ranges I use are generally much tighter, because we're trying to identify trends earlier on before it becomes, a full-blown disease process. So I'm going to be talking about those numbers. And I didn't want somebody to go home and look at their labs and think, oh, all my iron levels are, normal, when they might be suboptimal. You might be earlier on in this deficiency stage, but it's just, falling within that kind of skewed lab reference range. Okay, so with that said, the next thing is, it's very important when testing iron that you look at a full panel, not just serum iron. So what I like to run is serum iron, which just shows the amount of iron in the blood at the time of the blood draw, bioavailable iron, ferritin, which is the storage form of iron. Ferritin is stored in a cell called a macrophage. Its highest concentration is in the liver, some in the spleen. So nonetheless, transferrin, which is like I said, it's a binding protein, so it helps with absorption and transportation. Then you can also it can be valuable to look at either total iron binding capacity, which reveals like how hungry your body is for iron, or unsaturated iron binding capacity, UIBC, which is of your iron transporters, what percentage of them is unsaturated. So the total iron binding capacity, TIBC, and UIBC, they're different markers, but they're kind of overlapping views, which is why I generally just look at one or the other. And then lastly, it's very important to look at trends, and not just kind of one-off markers. And then also put it in the context, of course, of the whole person. You never want to just base someone's health off of lab values alone. You want to put it into the context of the person's symptoms, health signs, and history. Okay. So let's talk about the stages of iron deficiency. So stage 1 is normal serum iron. And for menstruating women, I like to use 85 to 130. Men, we can go a little bit lower, go about to like 70 to 115. Say menopausal women, I generally just use the same menstruating women, so I shouldn't have said that. Just women, 85 to 130, men, 70 to 115. And that's for serum iron. So again, serum iron is just the amount of iron in the blood at the time of the blood draw. It's worth saying it can be influenenced by eating particularly high iron meals the day before or the day of a lab draw. So if you're testing iron, definitely have a fasted lab draw for that reason. But nonetheless, so that's serum iron. For ferritin, and I'm going to focus on serum iron and ferritin today, and then I'll just talk about some things to look out for with some of the other markers. So with ferritin, the optimal range is 75 to 115. So kind of similar to the men's iron range. So if I see normal serum iron, and low ferritin, so below that 75 value, and especially if the person, they may or may not show signs, honestly. It kind of depends on where their ferritin is. If their ferritin is at 45, 50, 60, something like that, they might not show signs of low iron, or they do maybe occasionally, but it's not part of their like regular experience. If it's below in the 30s, 20s, they're probably, with enough questioning and probing, you'll probably start to uncover that they do have low iron symptoms, even if they're not, obviously aware that that's what it is. So that's trend number one, normal iron to low ferritin, with low ferritin. We'll often see transferrin. So the range I like for transferrin is 250 to 350. And that is showing, again, your absorptive capacity. So if you have a higher absorptive capacity, shows that your body is hungrier for iron. So if I see transferrin getting above that 350 or even like the high 300s, that would kind of coincide with, these suboptimal iron levels. Now, what's happening here is the analogy I like to give clients is, if you have a bank account, right, and you've got a checking account and you've got a savings account, and let's say, most of the time you're working. So normally you're making money, you have no problem paying off your expenses. Like, you've got money coming into your checking account, you can pay off your expenses, and you've got room for, free spending. So things that you just want to spend money on, not an expense, and you've got some left over so that you can store it off in savings. Then let's say you don't have a job, you lose your job, you quit your job. So you're only living off of your savings. You have no money coming in. Well, your checking account will stay, at a certain number for a period of time. And then you're going to start drawing from your savings, transferring from your savings to your checking, and you're using your checking account to then spend on money. And so then you pull more money from your savings into your checking, and then you're, using that to spend on money. Well, eventually you're going to notice your checking account is going down. Your expenses are staying the same. Your checking account is going down. You got to pull more from your savings account. Well, eventually your savings account is going down. So your savings account goes down, your checking is staying roughly the same so that you have money in there to pay off your needs. And then eventually you're running out of savings. And so now you're just working on what you have left in your checking, you're paying off everything that you need to from your checking. And then eventually your checking account is going to go down. I think I misspoke a second ago. Your savings will deplete first, right, before your checking account does. And then you've got what's left in your checking account before you eventually go broke. So that's what's happening here, right? If your body doesn't have actively have iron coming in to restore the savings account, restore the ferritin, the storage form of iron, that's going to drop first, because that's why it's there. It's the storage form. Your body uses it if it doesn't have any coming in. And it's supposed to use it on a get by basis, not at a I no longer have iron coming in basis, right? So that's why ferritin will start to drop first, and then you'll see your body's hunger for iron, its ability to absorb it from the food that we're eating from the gut, increases in the form of transferrin. Serum iron might look fine, and that is why we want to run a full panel every time. There's multiple reasons for this. Like I said, ferritin reveals more than just iron. It can show inflammation as well. But testing just iron, if iron is high, we have no other frame of reference. Is that inflammation? Did you eat a high iron meal? Are there nutrient imbalances? Is there an infection? Is there, we don't know what's causing that, or the context. So very, very, very important to run a full panel. Okay, that's phase one. Phase two is now your ferritin is low, below that 75, and your serum iron is also starting to drop low. So it's dropping below 85 for women, 75 for men. Excuse me. toddler life, right? Always sick. I think I've been saying that the last 3 weeks. This one's taken me a lot longer to get over, but I actually got sick twice in 3 weeks. So anyways, both are dropping low. So here, we might see iron, I don't know, 60, 50, something like that. Ferritin is 40s, 30s, whatever it might be. It's just below that lower range. The optimal range, by the way, you may still be well within the lab reference range, which is just far too broad. So you have to go by the optimal range because very regularly do we see symptoms overlap with that. So both start to drop. And the reason being is what I just explained, right? So your savings account starts to drop, then your checking account starts to drop. And then the final stage is, and I'll say in that stage, people are more than likely going to be symptomatic. Again, depending on where the iron is and where the ferritin is, it might be mild. They might just notice, oh, I feel a little winded all of a sudden, or oh, I get dizzy when I stand up, but like energy is good, stamina is good, endurance is good, cognition is good, like everything else is fine, right? It might be very mild, but they probably notice some symptoms. And then the last stage is anemia. So anemia occurs when the iron deficiency has hit the red blood cells. So iron is an essential mineral needed to manufacture hemoglobin, the oxygen carrying component of red blood cells. So anemia, when iron deficiency persists and is significant enough, your body can no longer adequately manufacture red blood cells or hemoglobin. So on lab work, if a complete blood count or CBC is run, red blood cells, hemoglobin, and hematocrit, the density of the red blood cells, will be HCT, RBC, and HGB are the often what you'll see them as. One of those, at least one of those will be low. This is a situation where we do use the lab reference range. So we do have functional values, functional ranges that we can look at those three values through. But I would never say if somebody falls below that optimal red blood cell range, the most I would do is say you might want to go talk to your doctor about this, especially if their iron and ferritin levels are within the lab range. And technically speaking, their red blood cell markers are within the lab range. To be frank, a doctor's not going to say anything about it. So the red blood cell markers, we do typically rely on the lab reference range. But if one of those is low, and we see the suboptimal iron and ferritin patterns, then that would be conclusive. That would be a situation where I would refer to a doctor. I'd probably talk to the client and say, hey, this is a pattern consistent with you exhibit XYZ symptoms. And, you can talk with your doctor to have a proper diagnosis. But it's also very important, as I said before, there's multiple kinds of anemias. So you can't just say, my red blood cells, hemoglobin or hematocrit are low, I'm iron deficient anemic. That's not necessarily the case. There's different patterns you need to look at because there can be, as I said, different forms of anemia. Not all require or benefit from iron. So that's where you would want to really work with a professional and not just self-diagnose or like Google diagnose. It's kind of algorithmic thinking, if you will. But nonetheless, driving home the point, anemia is when the iron deficiency has hit the red blood cells. So what causes low iron? And first of all, anybody listening to me live or anybody on the replay, is this making sense? Like, comment below. Let me know what you think. Have you had any experience with this? Let me know what you think. Okay, so what would cause low iron? When I think of nutrient deficiencies, there's like three pillars that go in my head. One is inadequate intake, right? You're just not eating enough through your diet. So vegans, vegetarians, I'm looking at you. This is very easy to happen. There's two different forms of iron. There's heme iron, which we get from animal products, red meat, liver, etc. And there's non-heme iron, which we get from plant products, excuse me, which is less bioavailable than heme iron. So you might be eating a lot of plants that are high in iron, like spinach and hemp seed and cashews, for example, but it's less bioavailable, less absorbable, and so you can still be low in iron. So that's an obvious example. People that eat a lot of processed foods, people that are avoiding red meat, people that are doing excessive fasting. So if you only eat one meal a day, maybe 2 meals a day, you're just not eating as much food. I'm a proponent of intermittent fasting, but you need to do it right. And you still need to eat adequate caloric intake. So those might be some examples of inadequate dietary intake. Obviously, if that's the case, if we determine that's the case, solution's easy, eat more iron. And I'll talk about, towards the end of this, I'll talk about some of the best iron-rich foods. Okay, number 2 is malabsorption. So what happens here is you're eating enough from your diet, but you're not absorbing it. So here, this large category. There could be malabsorption due to intestinal inflammation, celiac disease, Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, something like that, intestinal inflammation. There could intestinal inflammation also counts as not a diagnosable irritable bowel disease per se, but just inflammation of the intestines. We see that all the time. Somebody could have IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, and have GI inflammation. They could have SIBO or parasites or dysbiosis in general and have inflammation that is leading to less absorption of nutrients. There could be low hydrochloric acid in the stomach. So just suboptimal levels of hydrochloric acid. I just gave a thorough live talk on that, I think 2 weeks ago. So if you want to watch that, it's on my YouTube channel. You can also go to my Facebook group, Holistic Solutions for Mental Health and Wellness, and search hydrochloric acid or acid reflux, and it'll come up there. But low hydrochloric acid, chronic stress will do this. H. pylori will do this. If you're taking antacids like omeprazole, Prilosec, Tums, things like that, if you're taking antacids, that lowers hydrochloric acid. You have to have hydrochloric acid in order to absorb iron. So there's another reason. So it could be malabsorption. We also look at what is competing for absorption. So just like we need iron to manufacture red blood cells for energy synthesis, in other words, so do microbes, parasites, fungi, bacteria. They also use iron for respiration. So they can steal it from us. So if we have H. pylori, if we have parasites, blastocystis hominis, Indolamax nana, tapeworms, things like that, hookworms, if we have SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth or intestinal methanogen overgrowth, those are some examples that are really common causes of low iron. We might be eating enough, but they are stealing it from us and causing us to be deficient. So especially when I see low iron or suboptimal iron in a person with a great diet, like they're eating red meat, they're eating all the stuff that has iron. And a woman, they don't have really heavy menstrual cycles, and especially if they have GI symptoms or a GI history, that's where the mind goes, okay, there's probably something stealing it. Or malabsorption. Okay. Number 3 is in women, as I just mentioned, heavy menstrual cycles. And I'm talking like heavy menstrual cycles. So going through a tampon more than one tampon every hour, like clotty, heavy menstrual cycles. If you have just one day that's on the heavier side and then the rest of it is normal, that's probably not going to be enough to cause this. But if your period comes in every month, you're like, oh my God, like it's just this volume. And you know what I'm talking about, then that could absolutely particularly, do you also notice, do you get really tired around your menstrual cycle? Do you get more anxiety, PMS, depression, fogginess? Do you get restless legs? Do you get insomnia, the shortness of breath, less endurance? Like, do you notice more low iron symptoms around the cycle? That would be another indicator. And figuring out the cause of low iron, because, in a second, I'm going to talk about solutions, but I really want to drive home, figure out where you are in the phases of deficiency, but then also figure out why. Are you vegan? Have you been vegan for 10 years? Is it really just a problem of intake, or are you eating enough iron-rich foods? And you have to look at these other problems, because supplementation, you want to be conscious of. I do recommend iron supplementation sometimes. I've supplemented with iron in my past. But there's also, you have to look at the complexities around, like, for example, copper is really important for absorbing iron. So back in the day, like the early 1900s, 1800s, doctors associated iron deficiency actually with copper deficiency, and they would give copper to fix an iron deficiency. So if somebody has low copper, which is also quite a possibility, I could be causing low iron, but supplementing with iron won't really fix the problem, because you got to fix the copper too. So there's kind of a whole matrix of things that you want to look at. We actually have an iron recycling system. We're able to some degree, recycle our iron. And so, but we need nutrients for that. We need vitamin A, we need copper, we need zinc, we need magnesium. So there can be imbalances in some of these other minerals and vitamins. B vitamins are really important, where the problem isn't just low iron, that binary thinking, but inadequate mineral balance too. So that's why try to be kind of cautious when it comes to supplementing with iron. And low doesn't just mean supplement. And it also doesn't mean, again, if there's something stealing the iron within us, a microbe stealing it, I don't want to feed the microbe, right? That's just going to make them stronger. So again, things to think about, not just, grab my supplement because I'm low in iron. With that said, I will always support eating iron-rich foods. So now that we move on to solutions, solution number one, have a full panel tested. Actually, solution number one, scan your body. Do you have some of these low iron symptoms? Solution number two, have a full iron panel tested. Serum iron, ferritin, transferrin, and either TIBC or UIBC. Next, use the optimal range, not the lab range. So 85 to 130 for women for iron, 75 to 115 for men. 75 to 115 for ferritin also. So I was like, wait, what's the lab? What's the range? 75 to 115 for ferritin. 250 to 350 for transferrin. Okay. Next, if your lab value, figure out what phase of deficiency you're in. Next, if you are in a certain phase of deficiency, do you have what is the reason why? Do you have GI symptoms? Do you have heavy menstrual cycles? Are you not eating enough iron? What is the reason why? Some of which you might be able to figure out on your own, some of which you might not. You might need the help of a professional. So then, once we know the problem, then we move into solutions. Now, solution number one, I will always advocate for eating more foods rich in iron, because foods will also come encapsulated with the synergistic nutrients, the cofactors that we need. So beef, for example, red meat, like grass-fed, grass-finished, wild-caught, all those things. Beef will also have some zinc and also have some copper and also have some B vitamins. Like, it's got the matrix that we need, and it's very bioavailable. So red meat, beef, bison, lamb, Organ meats are phenomenal. Only in recent human history have we been only eating the flesh of animals. Like we always ate the full animal. And that is so important because different tissue has different nutrient profiles. So we get a much more balanced diet when we eat the whole animal. So organ meats, liver, wonderful. Here's a hack. I will eat most things. I don't love liver. So what I do is I buy organic chicken livers from Whole Foods. It's like a tub for like $3, $4. I blend it in a blender till it's liquefied. I pour that into ice cube trays. And then whenever we make ground beef or chili or something like that, pop it out, thaw the liver, mix it in. You'll never even taste it. And you get this awesome nutrient boost. That's how I like to do it. Can obviously supplement too. I'll talk about that in a minute, but I love food as medicine, right? Get it from your food whenever possible. So liver, organ meats, spleen, kidney, heart, all great. And then plant-based sources, cashews, hemp seed, spinach, chia seeds. Those are some of the best ones. Oh, other animals, seafood. So shellfish for sure, shrimp, oysters, mussels, mollusks, like all those are really, really awesome too. And they're high in copper. So that's another great win. Okay, so food first. Secondly, combine those foods with vitamin C sources. Vitamin C enhances the absorption of iron. So bell peppers, citrus like strawberries, oranges, things like that, tomatoes, that'll help the absorption. Okay, you can also supplement. So talking about supplements, I rarely, if ever at this point, use just an iron supplement, like a synthetic iron supplement. The three that I go to, one is by Trace Minerals, and it's their iron. I like Trace Minerals because it comes in an ionic, bioavailable, vegetarian source of iron. It's from Deep Sea, Utah. It's in Utah. So also not an exposure to microplastics. But all of their minerals are bound with or encapsulated with their like 72 different ionic mineral blends. So you get that synergistic blend of minerals again. So it'll be higher in iron, but you get it in this matrix of other minerals. So I really like Trace Minerals iron. Number 2 is supplementing with either beef liver or beef kidney or spleen, one of those. You could do any of those. It kind of depends on how much I want to push the iron support. So if I want to push it just a little bit, I'll use liver. If I want to push it a lot more, I'll use spleen. If I want to push it and the person has histamine issues, I'll use kidney because kidney also has diamine oxidase, which helps break down histamine. So yeah, I'll usually use some kind of a liver support. So that's it. Those are the supplements that I would use. I very rarely use just a synthetic iron supplement anymore. Okay, and then my last piece of advice is if you've been struggling with iron deficiency for a long time, whether you've known that's what it is, or if you've had the symptoms looking back and you're like, oh my God, how long has this been going on for? I really, really, really encourage working with someone that will help you figure out the why, right? If you've been vegetarian for 10 years, if there's an obvious why, fine. But if there's not, I really encourage that because that might be a sign of a deeper problem. And if that problem isn't fixed, you're just trying to clean out a muddy pond when there's still mud dumping into the pond, So we're looking for longevity of solutions and not just the quick fix of like taking an iron supplement. So, and somebody that can truly help you look at the algorithm, use algorithmic thinking to think about the patterns of iron that's being seen and, how to really fix it. So that is my word of advice. I hope this helped. I really hope this helped. This information. Again, share with me what was your biggest takeaway? If you're watching me live or if you're watching the replay, what was your biggest takeaway? What was your aha moment? How did this information land with you? How did it help? All right. And if you are watching and you're finally ready to figure out what's going on with your iron, or you suspect that there might be a deficiency and that's affecting how you feel, I'd be happy to set up a 15-minute call, free 15-minute consultation, phone call. Talk about what are you experiencing? What health challenges are you having? And what are you looking for? I'll share a little bit about my practice, our process. And if it feels like a good fit for both of us, then we'll talk about what next steps look like. And if not, that's okay too. So I'll drop that link in the talk. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.